Today we will be with Eric Heidle from our office. Most everyone who got to meet Eric a few weeks ago in Livingston. Eric is our communications director, but he has a background in photography, and so seemed like the perfect person to host a session about photographing your artwork. And Eric's going to talk about sort of the basics of 2D and 3D artwork photography, starting with using your smartphone. Talk a little bit about the pros and cons of upgrading to a camera and like the differences with a camera, and then a little bit about file formatting and sort of like the editing side of things, and then we hopefully will have plenty of time for Q&A after that. So, enough of my rambling. I will turn it over to Eric.
All right, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see. I know how to do it. Share. All right. So, I'm just calling this photographing your artworks for fun and mostly profit. Obviously, the goal here is for you to not spend all of your time having to be photographers and spending more of your time being artists. But obviously, that entails a fair amount of work to make good images of your artwork so that you can connect with people who want to collect your artwork. So starting off with two-dimensional stuff, I'll talk a little bit about two-dimensional artwork, and then we'll talk about 3D artwork and the differences in photographing those. Then we'll talk a little bit about um, using your phone versus using a higher end camera and a few things about that. So I thought I'd start with two-dimensional work, and I thought I would, in the spirit of artworks where you each share your work and talk about your own work, I thought I would do some demonstrations using artwork I've done, but I haven't done much artwork in about 25 years. So what I did was go into my garage and raid my old work from high school and college days. So I'll just show you a few things there, and then we can use a couple of those as an example. So something I did in high school, some kind of Greek temple, watercolor with some very sketchy perspective lines happening here. I'm not sure what's going on there, but uh, anyway, that was something I did back in the day. This is something I did for a magazine illustration, Teddy Roosevelt in the landscape, Darth Vader playing football, of course. Um, we had to illustrate saying or euphemism, so I did cattle marker version of going to hell in a handbasket. We had to illustrate a dream at some point when I was in college. So this was in my silkscreen class, and I had a dream one time that my mom was holding a Mary Kay party in my bedroom while I was sleeping. So there's me, and there's my mom, and there's my grandmother and all my mom's friends, which probably explains a lot about the way I turned out. So that's just a few images, and we'll maybe play with one or two of those. But how do you get best results when you're photographing 2D artwork? I'll give you a couple rules of thumb, and then we'll talk about some specific examples. So one thing I try to do a lot when I'm shooting stuff, it's what I call shooting in the dark room, by which I mean no matter how good you get your initial images when you're shooting them, just know that you're probably going to do some editing and retouching, and that's okay. So as I'm shooting artwork, whether it's for something I'm doing for the Arts Council or if I'm shooting a gallery show or something, I know that I'm never going to get the images exactly right. So I'm going to get them as close as I can in terms of getting the images square, getting the lighting correct, dealing with any reflections if they're under glass, all of those kinds of things. But as I'm shooting them, I'm already thinking ahead to uh, the things I'm going to do when I'm editing, because if you take the time to get your setup flawless and you have to move that setup a lot, or if you're having to shoot something when you're already at a show or those kinds of things, it may be easier to shoot as good as you can and edit later rather than get every shot perfect and not have to do any editing. So, depending on what you're doing, you may or may not find this approach useful. The other thing I want to talk about is three legs are better than two. When possible, use a tripod, whether you're using a phone or a mirrorless camera or a DSLR, just because um, it's going to take a little bit of those bumps out of the equation, so you'll have sharper images. It also helps you square up to the artwork. If you're trying to keep a rectangular painting rectangular and not trapezoidal, it's a little bit easier if you're on a tripod. So that's something that's pretty useful to do. So probably the most typical thing you have to account for is getting those rectangular pieces of art rectangular. So here's just a couple of those pieces of artwork I did in high school, and looking at this image I shot of the Teddy Roosevelt drawing. This is just the original drawing. It was a big piece. I think I did it on some kind of watercolor paper. Um, and obviously, I didn't take any time or care to make it perfectly flat or straight. Um, and contending with that stuff, depending on how picky you want to be, it can be pretty simple in software or it can be somewhat complicated. But to just have a look, let's go. Here's an image of Teddy. I'm in Adobe Photoshop right now. Everyone can still see that okay, hopefully. So looking at this, if I just want to get it so that I'm getting rid of the edges, all you have to do is crop it. And I'm sure you all know how to do basic cropping in a phone or photo imaging editing software. Pretty easy to do, and you can go back and recrop as needed. Um, and in this instance, it's okay because there's not really any straight lines in the image itself. It's pretty organic, so that would get the job done for most things. But there is a curve to this, and if I was really being picky, or if my artwork had straight lines that are going to be curved in a way I don't want them to be curved, I might take the time to do this a little more elaborately. And what I would do is get some of our um, warp adjustment editing goodies in here. And again, you don't have to learn Photoshop now. I just wanted to show you some things that can be done if you're not familiar with the software. So this, for example, is called Warp. And what it lets you do is tweak your edges in and out so that I can make these edges be a little straighter. So again, if I did have to do something critical, I could do it. And all of this is kind of one way of saying this is where shooting and trying to get it as straight as possible to begin with is the best option, because obviously you're going to have a lot of work to do if you have dozens of images that all need to have this done to it. So getting your camera square to the artwork, using a tripod, all those things is very helpful. But anyway, you can see with just a little bit of work, I've taken most of that distortion out of there, which is pretty beneficial if you're trying to make the artwork be as representative as possible. We can also do that on the phone. So here's mine is an iPhone 14, and this is just the Apple photo editing software. And if you go into your edit tools and crop, you have a couple options. You can rotate, and you can also skew it vertically and horizontally if you don't have it quite straight on when you shoot. So that's another fairly easy way to make that happen. And I find that this Apple Photos is really good for most things. I also have a mobile version of Adobe Lightroom, which is a little more in-depth for color correction and those kinds of things. So if you're really wanting to work to get accurate color, I would recommend Adobe Lightroom, either the desktop version, which I think you can buy that standalone, and I don't remember what it costs. And then the mobile version is like $5 or $6 a month. And I use it a few times a month, just enough to make it really useful for me. But I find that the Apple Photo app works great. And I don't know what the closest thing on Android is, but I'm sure the feature sets are pretty similar. So if anyone knows and wants to chime in, feel free. But so getting artwork straight, that's one thing you really want to look for when you're shooting. This example here, it was under a mat, so it was already flat and level. So I didn't have to worry about it. But things like this, where you're getting a little bit of a shadow based on where the light was, and the fact that the mat is not entirely flat here, could be a little bit problematic. So you can actually shoot under glass if you have like a copy stand, that kind of thing. Um, but that it can introduce glare, which is its own problem. So if you're shooting flat artwork, it's often easiest to shoot it with it laying flat on the ground and having light come from the sides rather from directly on. That way you tend to get a bit more even lighting. So if you set up um, even a basic setup in your studio space where you have flat space on the ground, you have a tripod that can point down. All that is a great way to do it if possible. Or if you have artwork on an easel and you can just get it square to the camera, that works pretty well too. So just looking at that really quickly, that gives you some idea that what's possible just with a very quick and dirty iPhone picture. All of these examples of my old school artwork were just shot with my iPhone. And this is actually pretty accurate color-wise to the original, which was pretty vivid. Um, the other big thing, probably when shooting your own artwork, editing-wise, that you have to think about is spots, grime, uh, gunk is what I call it. So removing gunk from your photos is another thing that's going to be a typical challenge. This is a piece I did in college in one of my graphic design classes, and we each had to illustrate a very short story from Franz Kafka. So this is called The Vulture. And so it's just black cut paper on artboard. And this is the original cut paper. I don't know what happened to the finished um, black and white copy of it, but this is what this looks like. And so if I wanted to try to resurrect this, again using Photoshop, looking at this, a few things you can do. Obviously, you have retouch tools. Again, if you've used Photoshop before or some of your mobile stuff, there's usually going to be something like a rubber stamp tool where you can pick an area, like if there's grime here, you can pick an area to sample from and just delete it. And then there are heal tools, and now some of the AI tools that come in a lot of these software applications will help do this more automatically. And that's only going to keep getting better and better. And so I think if there's a good use of AI, that kind of thing seems to be pretty valuable to me. Um, so you can also use some of the toning stuff in photo retouching software. Like in this case, this is Photoshop's levels, which lets you adjust lights and darks. So you can kind of see all the gunk that's on this grimy piece of artwork that I didn't take very good care of in the last 30 years. Um, but by tweaking some of those inputs and outputs, it's actually possible to get pretty close to what the final photocopied artwork would look like. Just a graphic, all black and white illustration. So you can make subtle improvements to your photos after you've shot them. Um, and that's some of the kinds of things you can do in software. It's something I do a lot. If I'm shooting something like a gallery show, I'll spend a fair amount of time doing little improvements like that. Uh, another thing is sharpening. Um, Phones are really good cameras, and obviously cameras are really, really good cameras, and they are getting sharper and better every day. But almost every image when it comes out could probably be a little sharper still. This is an illustration I did in 1988 when I was a senior in high school in my government class. I was listening to my teacher talk about the election that was happening at the time. And so I was sketching George Bush and Al Gore and Jesse Jackson and those guys. And it's just on a sheet of paper, and it's not bad sharpness wise, but it could be better. And software, again, is one way where you can kind of maximize that, especially if you're going to be showing detail of your artwork. So this was as I shot it using just my iPhone, and this is just applying a little bit of sharpening in Photoshop. And you can see some of the lighter sketches and those lines in there. And especially with those pattern textures, a little bit of sharpening helps. So as you develop, you start shooting your artwork and thinking about a workflow, straightening the geometry of your artwork, sharpening, little bits of dust removal, color correction. Those are all kind of parts of the same process that I go through. And the same goes for photographic work. This is a photo I took. This is actually the very first photo I ever took. It's of my mom when I was about 3. And she was on the phone, so she couldn't stop me from picking up the camera and taking a picture of her. And I don't think I did a very good job framing it, but um, it also wasn't all that sharp. And using software again, you can get things a little bit sharper if you look at the details in her face. This has been sharpened as much as possible, but beyond a certain point, if the photo isn't very sharp, you're just going to make sharpening it will just make the blurriness sharper, if that makes sense. So sharpness is a really important thing to get in photography, which sounds like maybe it's a little bit obvious, but it's important to think about what you want to have sharp. Um, and getting sharpness across the frame. We could talk about details in photographic settings if you want, like what are the best options for f-stop and shutter speed and all those things we can talk about a little bit depending on what your interest level is. Um, but in shooting your artwork, again, getting a system set up, if you have, depending on the size of your artwork and the nature of your artwork, if you can either lay it flat on the floor and shoot it square on, or if you can put it on an easel or on a wall so that it's also square and flat and as square to the camera as possible, that will save you a lot of the editing things I just showed you, making sure you have sharp focus, paying attention to your color. Natural light is pretty good for getting neutral color, but color shifts are something you really have to think about. They also make little color cards that have color chips on them that you can use to shoot next to your artwork if you're really doing something archival or if color accuracy is critically important. Those could be a useful tool. I don't use that very much, but I'm also not doing things for archival purposes. So um, those are some basic things about shooting 2D artwork. We'll talk about some more of these concepts in 3D, which is part 2, three-dimensional work. Um, so three-dimensional work kind of builds on that. Sharpness kind of plays a different role in three-dimensional work, but color correction, getting things square to the camera, getting things the way you want them to look, so that you're presenting a three-dimensional work in the best light possible is really important. Um, and I've shot some different gallery shows, which I'll show you some examples of. And Brian and I go out into the field and we shoot artwork for some of our folk and traditional artists quite a bit. That's interesting. And so uh, when you're shooting that kind of work, depending on what you're doing, again, if you have the luxury of being able to shoot it in your studio before you're sending it out, developing kind of a consistent setup for that will save you a lot of time. If it's small scale work like small ceramics, you can get those pop-up boxes which you can set the artwork in, and they provide really nice even lighting so that you don't get distracting shadows and those kinds of things. If it's bigger work, then you're kind of having to work around that to light things. But um, three-dimensional work tends to be pretty variable in terms of the conditions. And usually when I'm shooting stuff, I'm on scene and I don't really have a lot of control over lighting. So I, again, am thinking about shooting for the dark room where I know I'm going to be making edits and corrections later on and kind of being comfortable with that. So to kind of talk about 3D art, there's an artist whose work I've been documenting now for a few months. She's kind of an up and coming multimedia artist. Her name is Penny, and she just started a permanent residence at my house in January. She's really interested in working with found objects like sticks. She's really good at collecting those. Here's an assemblage of some of the artwork she's been doing recently. So this one I shot with my Nikon camera, and we'll talk a little bit about the details of that. Um, Speaking about fiber arts earlier, she's into fiber arts and she's really interested in kind of making, taking fashion and making it her own with these zipper pulls. Shoes seem to be a real passion of hers. This is a project she's been working on for about a month and a half now. Here's another one she just started. So you can see kind of the breadth of Penny's work as she recontextualizes artwork and makes it her own. But talking about these objects and how you actually shoot them, you can start thinking about the choices you want to make. And if I show you this photo of the shoe and this photo of the shoe, the difference is in the amount of area that's in focus or depth of field. And if you're familiar with that concept in photography, depth of field is how much of an image is in focus. And you can control that uh, both with a cell phone and with a DSLR. Obviously, with a professional camera, it's going to be a lot easier because uh, lenses provide a lot more control. But phones are actually getting pretty capable at doing this too, even if it's in software. But what's interesting about this is in this image, most of the shoe is relatively in focus. So you can kind of get a sense of what the whole object is. If I reduce the depth of field so that only this area is in sharp focus and the rest is thrown out of focus, I'm really uh, directing the viewer's eye to that detail. So when I'm photographing three-dimensional artwork for a show or for work we do at the Arts Council, I think about that a lot and thinking about what I want the viewer to look at and what I want them to consider. So just looking at those side by side a little bit, that's one thing to think about when shooting your artwork. If you want all of it to be in crisp detail, you're going to want to shoot it one way. If you want to have it be a little more expressive and artistic, this can be a good way to go too. So it's a choice you have to make. And if you're using a DSLR or a digital camera, there's some effects that this choice will entail involving how much light you have available, what's in your background, all those things. So something to think about, but we could talk more about it if you have questions, if that's something that's of interest. Um, Something else in 3D art that 2D art doesn't uh, isn't really a consideration is composition. How do you want to actually show what the object looks like? You could do something like this where it's a little bit more formal where you could have that previous shot that's more in the space. And both are valid. Like if I'm shooting a given object, I'll usually try to get it a few different ways because I don't always know exactly how it's going to be used, how the images might be used if we haven't talked about it beforehand. So I like to have some flexibility in the ways I'm shooting it. Obviously, the amount of detail in the object um, will have some effect on that as well. So taking that to actual professional human-made artwork, um, I want to talk a little bit about just one show that I shot a while back and some of the artwork in that and some of the things I looked at and looked for while I was trying to capture the show. This is artwork by a Ukrainian artist named Yanina Mironova, and she recently completed a residency at the Archie Bray Foundation in Helena, and this was her show at the Paris Gibson Museum in Great Falls. And as you can see, she's a ceramic artist. She also does some two-dimensional complementary works. And so there was a lot of work in this exhibit and trying to get as much coverage as I could of it in the time that I had um, meant really trying to be creative about how uh, I placed the camera so that I had good compositional results, looking for detail to help explain to the viewer what these things look like up close, how you think they would feel if you could touch them, um, trying to see what the artist's process is and capture a lot of the detail. And as you can see from her work, you have these very large, whimsically sort of cartoonish figures, but then you have 2D figures on top of them. So it's really kind of two challenges in one. Um, and as good as gallery lighting is at um, showing the artwork when you're looking at it, it can often be kind of a nightmare photographically. It's astonishing how much uh, lighting changes from one shot to the next when you turn the camera in a different direction or when you go wide versus zooming in on something. It can really be extremely variable. So color correction, trying to make all the images look like they came from the same place can be a bit of a challenge. Again, if you're the creator of the artwork and you're able to photograph your artwork in your studio setting before it goes out, you should be able to control that and have a fairly consistent setup. But if you're trying to, photograph your work once it's in a show, um, then you have to kind of work with what you're given a little bit more, depending on what's permissible by the gallery and other factors. So in this case, in this show, these figures, as you can see from this one's a pretty good representative example of her work. And so there's things going on at, basically three different scales here. You have the figure itself, and this one's probably 2 feet high. Um, and within that, you have all of these painted figures on top of it. And so you look at the entire picture, you look at the entire piece, but then you have to move in to see what's going on at a closer scale. Um, and beyond that, then you go in as close as you can to see the texture. I think this one is a self-portrait. A lot of them resemble her a little bit. And here you can see there's a kiln and pots. And so she's drawing on these traditions of Ukrainian egg painting and figure painting that go onto an object. So there's a sort of a folkloric aspect to her work that I was trying to capture. You can see here she's got a hand truck with stuff on it, and then here's stuff being boxed up, and here's artwork on a dolly. So she's sort of narrating her own process of being a resident at the Bray and her experiences there. So trying to capture the overall bit of the piece and then details was part of the challenge. And in this frame here, there's a lot going on in the background, which is sort of good in that you can see a lot of what's going on, but it's also makes it a little bit hard to tell what this shape actually looks like. And even though you're starting to lose focus back here, which helps this stand out, it's not enough on its own. So one challenge is finding the right angles. In a setting like this so that you can see the detail. So make it interesting is one thing I was trying to do. I couldn't shoot every single side of every single piece at the time I had, so I looked for really good representative pieces. And this for me worked pretty well because you could see a detail of the overall figure, plus you could see close-up detail uh, of the line drawings and what was happening, and you could make sense of it all. And so this kind of composition can be really interesting because it lets you have these out of focus foreground elements, out of focus background elements. You can see a little bit of what else is happening in the space. Um, but it's really, again, focusing the viewer's attention on one thing to kind of tell the story. And then at that deepest level on her artwork, getting in so close that you can see the actual texture. I mean, at a slight distance, the artwork almost looks fuzzy, or like it's felt or fabric texture because of the way she treats the clay and coats it and paints it. So I thought it was really important to capture a little bit of that. And there's her signature, which is actually, very minimal and humble on the work. And a little detail, just this fine, fine detail of the drawing. So, over the course of seeing a series of these, hopefully the viewer gets a pretty good idea about her style, about her technique, and about the overall sense of her work. Something else you can do, or I have done, is look for opportunities to sort of tell the whole story in one image. And that was kind of what I was working to do here. Um, in this case, this was sort of the signature iconic piece of this exhibit. And this became part of Paris Gibson Square's permanent collection, and it's now installed outside the building. But it was sort of greeting visitors as they entered the gallery containing her work. But I thought it was interesting that you could see the big figure here and get a hint of the other pieces inside, as well as the title, Folk Tales and Fanfare of the exhibit itself. So I was trying to find, a few things to kind of talk about all at once in this image just because it happened to work out well. But it's really hard to shoot a photograph like this because to have this area be in focus and to have this be in focus and this be in focus, cameras don't want to do that. If I focused on this spot, this would be subtly out of focus. And if I focus on this, that's going to be out of focus. So what I had to do in this case was I put the camera on a tripod, set focus for the foreground, shot that, and then shot a separate frame with a focus here and combined them in Photoshop and feathered this part in so that both would be in focus. And photography gurus will call that stacking focus. And, again, it's something that takes more time, but in a special case like this, it made a lot of sense to try to see everything all at once so that it tells that whole story of what the show is. Guiding the viewer's attention, I talked about a little bit. This is just a crop of that last image. And so this is getting in kind of to the heart of the matter. You see just a hint of that signature piece in the show, and you have a pretty legible shot of this, of the title. So this is the kind of thing you could use as a cover or as a brochure or something on your website where you're really distilling it down. And again, this was just kind of a fortuitous couple of elements that lined up for me. And you might not necessarily be able to do that in every case, but it worked here. Um, Something else that while I was working on this was the ability to kind of add some dynamic elements. I was in there shooting it during the course of a normal day, and visitors were coming in and out. And at one point, a bunch of people were just in there, and they wanted to look at the same things I was shooting. So I just decided to use that, and so I had my camera set up with a fairly slow shutter speed, which worked out kind of nice because I was able to get these folks in sharp focus, examining the artwork while someone else was walking through. And it kind of made for a nice, just sort of lucky image that helps show the scale of this artwork. It helps show, people looking at it, examining it, and also, uh, the plinths that they put these on, I thought were great too, because they sort of extend that sort of whimsy of her style onto the way it's mounted, and the AstroTurf is kind of a nice touch. And you can see the 2D drawings and paintings also. So this was kind of a nice image that sort of encapsulated the entire thing. Um, so again, this is a situation where I didn't have the time to control lighting. I didn't have the time to shoot every single thing. So I did my best to get representative shots of everything, get a variety of shots, get wide shots, get tight shots, to really get an essence of it. And in your own work, I'm guessing that most of you are probably going to be meticulously documenting every bit of art you do before it leaves your hands and your control. And you will have the luxury of being able to do that at your own pace. But if you're having an exhibit or a show and you're trying to capture what the sense of your show looks like, being able to be flexible and just kind of roll with what you see is really helpful. And so that's kind of how I approach these.
Well,
Another thing.
oh,
Oh, go ahead.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna say, like, I could see someone at a show or a fair or a festival
Hmm.
capturing an image like that of their booth set up and people
Yep.
walking through, and
Hmm.
kind of capturing an image like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I'll talk about that a little bit too, just like capturing the bigger essence of your work and um, the buzz around it maybe I think is really valuable. At some of our council meetings, we have receptions before the council meeting, and we did one in Butte at the Imagine Butte Resource Center. And I set up a GoPro camera above the common meeting space in the gallery, so you could see you could see the resource center and the print studio and a little bit of that. And I just set it to go, and then I made a time lapse video out of that that showed the entire evening more or less, or as much of it as I could capture before the battery ran out. But it was helpful for us to kind of show in action what our community reception looked like. And I think for for you folks, if you're making art and then showing it and kind of showing the community and potential purchasers of your art, the buzz around it and the excitement around it, that kind of thing is certainly interesting and worth capturing. So yeah. Another thing I like to think about in 3D photography is white space. And by that, I just mean thinking about how you're going to use the images and um, giving yourself some flexibility around that. This is Robert Harrison's work. He's another ceramicist. He's here in Helena. And this is a catalog for a show he had at the Paris Gibson Square Museum. Um, I took these photos and I designed the catalog. And in taking the photos, I kind of did the same thing I did with the Miranova exhibit. I went through the whole thing and shot as much of it as I could and tried to get a combination of wide shots and details to capture the whole essence of the show and get a really good sense of it for the viewer. But one thing I was thinking about as I was shooting was leaving some white space around some of these so that um, you have extra image to play with. So if you're going to be having a print made or a postcard of your show or a full catalog, or if it's going to be online, but you want a little bit of breathing room, having space here for these captions, um, having a little bit of space around these so that it's not every image is the same amount of detail, like having a little bit of just visual breathing space can be really handy. So I think about that, and sometimes my temptation to zoom in, I try to counteract that with like leave a little bit of extra breathing room because you can always crop it out later. So think about levels of detail when you're shooting your work. And to go back to Penny's artwork, white space doesn't even have to be white, just space around the object. Sometimes a little bit of isolation is really great um, to help, again, focus the attention on the object. Here again, it's pretty shallow depth of field. You can see sharp detail and tooth marks and little hairs and all that good stuff here, and then it falls away out of focus pretty quick. So it's a nice way of getting the attention to detail, depending on how important that is to your work. If you're a painter and you have kind of a rich impasto style, you might shoot it your work straight on, but then you might also show it sideways to show the buildup of paint. Or if you're working sculpturally in 3D or with fiber art, um, being able to show the detail in whatever form it takes by creatively angling the camera to get alternate shots of it is really helpful. And kind of to Brian's point about being able to see the whole space, show the process. If you're able to document yourself while you're working, or to show your studio space, or to show interactions with the public, that could be great too. And obviously, if you're busy doing those things, you're not going to be behind the camera. But if you're working with, a colleague, or if you want to have someone kind of help you, help them think of the things you want, um, so that you can get shots of you in action or at work. Just to talk a little bit more about lighting, and I don't want to dwell on it at great length because it's such a technical, wonky subject. And it can be very time consuming if you bring in lights, dedicated lights to a setting to shoot something. It can take a long time to set up and get the way you want. But thinking about lighting and ways to use it to your advantage is super helpful. Again, for 2D stuff, it's less of an issue. You know, you're trying to avoid shadows. You're trying to avoid glare if it's under glass. You're trying to make sure that the lighting is consistent and even so you don't get weird color casts on two-dimensional work. Three-dimensional work obviously is a different kettle of fish. And if you have to work with what you're given, just being aware of what you're getting and what you're seeing can help you kind of dial it in so that you don't have to spend too much time after the fact editing. So one thing I think about, probably the most important thing lighting wise, is lighting for color accuracy. Um, Obviously, getting a good exposure so that everything is visible is important. If you're in a dark gallery space or someplace where you can't control lighting, that's obviously a problem. But if you have adequate light, the next thing you want to make sure is that your artwork looks correct, you know, from a color standpoint. Um, I shot a series of photos of this guy. His name's Phil Maynard. He's a luthier. He lives up in Rimini outside of Helena. He makes these very high-end, gorgeous guitars. This was a series of photos I shot for Big Sky Journal, and this is similar to work that Brian and I do a lot when we go to meet folk artists, and we photograph them, we photograph their work, we photograph their workspace. You know, when I talk about documenting the process, you know, if you can have photographs behind the scenes of your work or your workspace, this could be really helpful. But in this photo, the most important thing, I had two most important things, which I had to sort of balance was I had to make sure that he was well exposed and looked right, that he looked, you know, his skin tones were right, but the guitar had to look really right because his guitars are just unbelievably gorgeous. They look almost as if they are, you know, the finishes on them just look liquid. It's kind of astonishing, and he has this very cluttered, chaotic space, and he's sort of disheveled. Um, but the result of all of that is these gorgeous, gorgeous instruments. And so I really strove hard to make sure that I was using the light I had to work with there to my best advantage. And the light itself is really, you can just barely see at the top. There's this overhead bank of fluorescence coming straight down. And fluorescent light kind of gets a bad rap because it's kind of soulless, but I've been astonished by how often just overhead fluorescent lighting can make this kind of thing look pretty good. And so I made sure that I was getting accurate color out of the camera while I was shooting this. And again, shooting in the dark room, I knew that after the fact I was going to have to do a little work just to bring out contrast and skin tone on his features. So I did go into Photoshop and do some color correction there. And then I believe I also did a little bit of subtle vignetting in the background to make the edges kind of get a little bit darker, which helps emphasize the central subject. And I was also super fortunate from a composition standpoint, you know, with having the air hose here and this guitar here, both in a similar yellow color, kind of framing him. You know, that wasn't anything I set up. It's just how his studio uh, appeared that day. But being able to kind of center him in that, and I moved him backward and forward, closer and farther away from me to get the best possible lighting on him that I could, and keeping the guitar well lit. So um, that was a situation where I had enough time to kind of fiddle a little bit because I knew that was probably going to be the hero shot from this. But I also had the chance to shoot some of the stuff up close, and here you can see what I mean by just the tone on these guitars is beautiful. The color and the figuring and the texture of the wood, and the details he puts into them. And so it was super important to get all that. Um, and again, I'm using a fairly shallow depth of field, so the by the time you get back to the bridge and the pegs, it's starting to go out of focus. So it's really trying to point the viewer's eye right here. Um, and if I'd wanted, I could have shot the whole thing to make it closer to in focus so you could see all of these details. But I kind of prefer this approach where it's a little more expressive rather than descriptive. And over the long haul, if you have a series of images, you can kind of get the sense of it. And again, the amount of banding that he has in here is just, really incredible details that he puts into these instruments. So trying to get all that to the extent that I could was really important. So lighting for color accuracy, if you have um, if you're painting figures, human figures, if they're fairly realistic, skin tones might be something to focus on. Otherwise, just trying to represent the colors as correctly as possible can be really important. And there's a lot of things you can do in software to contend with color casts. Like if the light you're under is too yellow wherever you are, you can take that out with a little bit of color correction. We can talk about that a little bit later if you'd like to.
Do you use vignettes very often?
I do a little bit. I think, I think there's something there. They're a thing that's super easy to overdo and to make look really obvious and kind of heavy-handed. Um, so if when I use them, I try to make them pretty subtle and I make them um, pretty soft so that they don't occur very abruptly. It's kind of a funny thing because for decades, camera manufacturers have been trying to build lenses that are completely even across the frame that don't vignette in the corners. And then as soon as people got their hands on digital cameras, they got really excited about vignetting things to make it look more dynamic. So
That is funny.
yeah, it's kind of a matter of taste, I think. Like I will do it sometimes to just emphasize a central character or figure a little bit, like in that case. But I try to be pretty quiet about it. It's kind of like graphic designers using really heavy drop shadows behind type and that kind of stuff. It can look good or it can look really, you know, overdone. So you have to kind of do it by eye and see what works for you. So some other lighting considerations really quick, lighting for detail, modeling, and texture. With the Yanina Mironova stuff I showed you earlier, the close-up texture on her work was really important to be able to describe and communicate because it it looks like it wants to be really touchable, like it looks like it should be fuzzy, like it's felt. And so getting in close was really important on those. And these are just some shots I took. I was just kind of playing with my camera and trying to see what some black and whites looked like with a little bit of texture and grain in it. Um, but here again, lighting is doing a lot of work here because it's making the church key kind of the critical element and maintaining the detail and not having the bright highlights blow out the type on here was important. And then having again the focus fall off and then having this grain appear, all of that kind of contributes to the feel of this. So, oftentimes you're trying to photograph your artwork to describe your artwork and not to add yet another layer of artistic intent on top of it. But maybe sometimes you are. You might photograph if it's a painting and it's just in a nice frame, you might want to photograph that whole setup, the painting, the frame, the wall, maybe even a person looking at it, to get that sense of, okay, here's what my artwork looks like in the real world. So thinking about those things, uh, particularly with 3D artwork, but maybe with 2D artwork too, can be really important. And like I said, lighting is a whole thing, and there's brightness of lights, numbers of lights, lighting setups, where you position lights, where they're pointed at, color temperatures of those lights. It's its own discipline, and I can certainly answer questions to the extent I can for you and talk about that. But I didn't want to get too deep into the weeds on that here. But depending on what you're doing, it's probably possible for you to find a consistent lighting setup in your studio that you know what it's going to do, how it's going to respond, and you can get consistent results from. We talked a little bit about like textiles and pattern textures, and sometimes those can be a little bit difficult to photograph. Um, because if it's a repeated pattern texture, sometimes it'll interfere with the pixel grid of the actual camera sensor, and you get these weird like moire patterns and goofy stuff. So those can be tricky to capture. And a couple of things I've found that are helpful. In this case, this is my dad's old backpack, and it has all these wonderful little details. And part of it is this fabric that you can see here and here. One trick is using our old friend a shallow depth of field, because what it's doing is it's blurring that texture. And depending on what you're trying to show the texture, showing some of the texture sharply in focus and some of the texture thrown out of focus gives a nice visual contrast and kind of contributes to that touchiness of it, that lets viewers know what it must feel like to actually hold. So that's one way you can kind of defeat that interference pattern problem. Um, Another thing you can do, and this sort of simulates it, is using a little bit of blurring in software like Photoshop or other tools. You can actually add just a very small amount of blur, which will take the edge off, the sharpness, which can help break up those interference patterns. And a third trick is adding a little bit of noise or grain. If I go back to this, um, really subtle background transitions are also kind of problematic, just as like textile textured patterns are. You can get banding in backgrounds, and this noise pattern, I don't know how well you can see it, um, but it's really useful for kind of breaking up banding and interference patterns. So if you are able to live with just a tiny amount of noise in your images after the fact, that can help kind of dissipate those uh, pattern problems with textiles and fabrics.
Okay. 7:05. Eric, you ready to launch back in?
Yep, I am.
Cool. And so Eric, since you have your screen share up,
Mhm.
you probably can't see the chat, but Audrey had a question in the chat about, and maybe you'll cover this later, but can you talk a bit about the quality of images needed to make prints of original artworks?
Yeah, I will touch on that in just a little bit here. I got a short section kind of on file formats and sizes and uh, differences between phone quality and camera quality. So yeah, I will absolutely do that.
Cool. Audrey's also curious about videography, quick tips, maybe if like the same
Hmm.
tripod lighting
Hmm.
standards apply, and then selfie tips.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me think about that for a sec. Yeah, for videography, the technology has really gotten more compact. One device can do it all. A phone can do an amazing amount of stuff. I use for my professional stuff, I use a couple of Nikon cameras. Um, the new mirrorless ones that they've had out for a few years now are really great because they're really good at doing video natively. The older ones were kind of a bit of a compromise, making a still camera act like a video camera, but now they're kind of made to do both from the ground up. So if you buy any of the, mainstream uh, mirrorless handheld cameras now, you can do both. Um, Obviously, with lighting, it's going to kind of narrow down what you might buy for lights. If you're a still photographer in the traditional sense and you have strobe lights that just flash, those don't work too well for video. So you need continuous lighting for that. So you have to kind of think about, okay, what kind of lighting setup would I need if it's a small thing? For little setups like tabletop setups and interview setups, little ring lights or small LED panels are great, and they're super portable and compact and don't use a lot of energy. So there's a million options out there. If you're trying to shoot bigger environments, like that gallery display, if you had to do your own lighting in there, you'd have a lot of lights to contend with. But yeah, a lot of the we can talk about specific camera models and brands. We're looking at buying one for the office right now, and so we're kind of hashing out the details on what we're going to get. But just about anything you buy right now will be amazing. And you can get some that aren't terribly expensive. You can, it's a rabbit hole that once you start going down, especially with video, um, that once you buy, one camera and a lens, you're going to want another lens and another lens and more lights and all the stuff. So it can kind of, be its own thing, but yeah, there's so many great options out there. And if you have specific questions on what you're trying to do, like if you want to do interview setups or if you're trying to capture work process or any of those things, I can comment on those a little more directly, Audrey, if you want.
That sounds great. Maybe at the end we can visit that if you haven't touched on it.
Sure. Yeah, great. Yeah, and selfies too. The best selfie camera is going to be a phone. It's, hard to hold up a big camera and know that you're getting everything in the frame, but it can be done. Um, but getting, images of yourself with your work or with clients or in an environment where you have a show going on, that those can all be great and kind of go to Brian's point about, capturing the vibe in a room. Um, Kind of capturing the energy around your work and people's enthusiasm for the work. So I think documenting the stuff around the work that you're producing is always great to do. All right. If no one else has any questions at the moment, I'll launch back in and then we'll go through this section and then we should be ready for some Q&A. Okay, so kind of to that point, iPhone or Android phone or handheld phone camera versus a full professional camera. There are a million options, and there are good reasons to use both. I thought one thing that might be interesting is just to kind of look at a side-by-side comparison of an object taken with both. So on the left, this one is taken with my iPhone, which I think is an iPhone 14. So it's a few generations old. And on the right is taken with a Nikon Z6 III, which is a current generation Nikon mirrorless camera with interchangeable lenses. Um, and so you can kind of tell there's a little bit of difference in just the overall uh, feel or vibe of them. The iPhone comes out of the box really bright, punchy. The Nikon color is a little bit more muted by comparison. And um, one advantage of shooting um, with a professional camera is the ability to shoot raw, which is what photographers call the digital negative. It tends to be a very neutral image, and it's basically just capturing what the sensor itself sees. And then you can have the camera or software apply more of a look after the fact, but you get a really high amount of dynamic range, which is the difference between your brightest brights and your darkest darks, as well as the full spectrum of color. Looking at these, the iPhone image pops out so much in part because it's not capturing as much dynamic range. If you look at um, the pinks on here, they're bright and colorful, but they're almost a little pasty in a way. Whereas the camera is a lot smoother, and the shadows are a little more detailed and full in these areas than they are in the phone. But again, as with both things, it's kind of a matter of taste. If you look at the detail on here, at this level, the detail on the stitching looks pretty good because again, it's bright. There's a lot of contrast, and it's a little subtler in the Nikon. If we zoom in a little bit more, so here's kind of a more one-to-one comparison of those shots. So here's where you can kind of tell where the professional camera is going to start earning its keep. The amount of detail, fine detail here is just a lot more than the at least my iPhone can achieve. The newer ones are better than mine, so they're probably getting really good. Um, but you can see here too, like in the areas where it starts to fall out of focus, there's kind of a haziness or jitteriness. And on the out of focus areas on the Nikon, they're still smooth and rendered cleanly, more than they are here. So you're definitely going to get a little bit better quality using a dedicated camera than you are with a phone. And again, how much that matters to you depends on how critical capturing detail is, how much flexibility you need. You know, if you're shooting three-dimensional artwork, if you need to show wide and tight and all those different levels, depending on, you know, if you do buy a dedicated camera, the lenses you buy or the lenses you buy are going to have an impact on what you're able to shoot as well. I use with this Nikon, I have a 24 to 70 millimeter lens, so it zooms from fairly wide to slightly telephoto. But if you zoom it all the way out to the telephoto range and then shoot at objects like this, you get a really nice amount of detail out of that. So I find that to be a really flexible setup. And then I have a bunch of other lenses I use for other things. Um, but that one's a pretty good go-to lens.
I'll leave. I can watch. I can see her from here. I'm gonna be in the office. I'm gonna let the dog out and come back up. Okay, and I've had a.
Sorry about that. Carol mentioned that is anyone else having trouble seeing the images? Or Carol, it might be maybe your viewing settings, like whether you have a gallery view or something else like that. I just want to make sure that can folks give me a thumbs up if they're seeing Eric's shared screen? Cool.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully you can see with the little details I'm talking about here. And I'll provide this PowerPoint after the fact so that you can look at the slides um, in your spare time if that's helpful. Uh, but talking about some other differences between um, phones and dedicated cameras, you know, obviously from a phone, the ease of use is perhaps the biggest thing. They're so good and you know, having them always with you, uh, it's hard to replace that. And so there's certainly no reason not to be taking images of your artwork and your process and gallery setups and all those things with your phone, because why not? It's so easy to do. And just depending on your use case and what you plan on doing with those images later, that might be all you ever need. Also, the ability to share those images instantly and directly. Um, you know, my Nikon camera, I can connect it via Bluetooth and I can download images from it, but it's a process and it takes time and it's not easy and it's not straightforward. So if you're at a show and you want to you know, show a gallery dealer across the country what your show looks like when you're in the thick of things, you know, an iPhone is going to win every day of the week. So absolutely for that reason, you should be taking images with your phone. Also, some of that image processing I kind of hinted at a minute ago, sharpening, color enhancement, all of this stuff that kind of makes uh, this iPhone side of the shoe look great right out of the box. That's the phone's processing doing a lot of work for you. It's making some choices that are kind of, uh, you know, the most good for the most people. And you can still go back in and edit those for more detail. But the fact that the images are so good right away is another way I would recommend um, using a phone. As for you know, stepping up, making the investment in a camera, learning to use the camera if you're not familiar with it already, all those things, you know, it's a substantial amount of time and effort. Um, but the fact that you have so much control over the image, being able to use different lenses, being able to manually zoom those lenses, um, the different the different image quality of those lenses, it's hard to replace that with a phone. Phones can emulate it, but they can't really do it. And being able to move around in space and really work on your composition, I couldn't do what I do using just a phone. And fine detail, like we talked about, you can again kind of see it here. Hopefully, everyone can see that. Um, right now, the pro cameras are still going to beat the phones all day long, especially if you're combining them with lenses that can zoom in and get really close or capture exactly what you're trying to get. Color fidelity, again, because Pro cameras let you shoot in RAW mode, you have the ability to take that digital negative and kind of start from zero and make your own choices if you wish to get color exactly right. So you can compensate for, weird lighting in the room or whatever else might be happening. Um, for archival purposes, Pro Camera is going to definitely do a better job. Resolution, usually you're going to have higher resolution images than you will out of a phone, and the one-to-one pixel detail will be better, so you'll have more usable image, which kind of becomes important if you're doing prints, printing, you're doing catalogs, those kinds of things where you need a lot more detail. And that RAW format itself, I think some phones can do RAW now, and I don't know to what extent they can, but that having that ability to have all of the information that your camera sensor initially sees and being able to interpret it any way you want is it's another thing that I couldn't really replace with a phone. And maybe for most people, it's not something you need all the time, but once you kind of play with it and learn about it, it's kind of hard to go back a little bit. Um, so let's talk about files and formats. That's kind of the next part of, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android phone or a camera, deciding what formats you want to deliver stuff in to people is sort of important. It's basically choosing the right tool for the job. Um, and there's really only a few formats that you need to use on a day-to-day basis. And I just made a cheat sheet, and this will be a good one to, I'll make it, like I said, I'll make this available. This one's a little grid that's kind of gives you a really good idea what the main uh, file formats are and what they do. JPEG obviously is the one that's probably most familiar to everybody and the most ubiquitous. It's a great format because it's universal. Anything can open it, anything can save it. You can see it on anything. They're also very small files, relatively speaking. They can compress down quite a bit, so it's easy to send them via email or text without a lot of hassle. Um, Primary disadvantage of JPEG is that it is not a lossless compression scheme. So when you save something as a JPEG, that's all the information you're ever going to get. And if you resave it, it'll get worse. And if you resave it, it'll get worse because the compression algorithm, it throws out color and pixel information in order to make files smaller. So just knowing that, for most uses, it doesn't matter if you're looking at things on screen and you start with an image that's big enough for what you're doing, and you save it with a high enough quality factor, you'll be fine. But it's not necessarily the best thing if you're doing print, if you wanted to make a poster or a giant art print of your work. That's not how you would want to deliver that. So it's really great for web, email, social media. PNG is very similar to JPEG. And the chief difference and advantage of PNG files is that you can include transparency in them. And that's mostly an advantage for web pages and that sort of thing, where if you had a logo with an unusual shape and you only wanted the logo itself with the edge, and you might plop that on top of something else, instead of having a big white rectangle around the outer edges of it, you just have the shape of the logo. So that's what PNGs do really well. They also do compress and lose color and detail information, but they're pretty good as well. So those are great for web and social, and either one of those is perfectly ubiquitous. TIFF files are probably ones you use less frequently, but the biggest advantage of TIFF files is that they don't lose any information. They don't throw away color information. They don't throw away detail. Um, you can compress them, but it doesn't throw away detail in the process. The trade-off is that they tend to be a lot bigger file size wise, so that they're mostly used for print. So if you are taking images and you're going to deliver those for art prints, or if you're going to produce a book or a catalog of a show, um, you're going to probably want to provide those images to the printer or the designer of the project or whomever with TIFF files if you can. Either that or very high quality JPEGs. But TIFF files are great because they're also they can work in multiple color spaces and really quickly most images you see online are going to be RGB color. That means just red, green, blue because they're made to be displayed on a monitor. TIFF files can be saved in CMYK color, which is used in 4-color printing on paper. So that's another reason they're important for printing because they translate those RGB colors into CMYK colors that are more accurate for printing. So um, a lot of cases you might give either edited uh, JPEGs or high quality JPEGs out of whatever your software is to a designer or to the printer rather than TIFFs. But if you have the time and the storage space to do TIFFs, you know that you'll be giving them the very best thing you can for print stuff. So that's when I would use a TIFF file. Um, EPS is kind of an older format. EPS files can be either full color photographic images or they can be flat logo-like art. The advantage is that EPS vector images can be scaled up and down infinitely without losing any quality. Like logos are generally done as EPS files unless they have photographic elements in them. Uh, they're not used much online because some online software doesn't display them at all. So they're more of a graphic design tool than anything else, but um, just know that they're out there. Typically, you'll see logos delivered in EPS format. And last and probably least is GIF files, at least for our purposes. GIF files are, another ubiquitous web format, very small file sizes, and they also have the advantage of being, you can animate them, obviously, which probably doesn't come into play for most of what we're doing here. But they're very low quality. They tend to have obvious pixelation on them. So they're not really good at expressing high quality color for artwork, but they're used on the web all the time. So these are just like some of your basic formats. And depending on what you're doing, what you're shooting for, and what you're delivering final images for, probably it's going to be JPEG or TIFF most of the time, based on whether it's going to be viewed on a screen or on paper. But that's an easy one to refer back to. All right. The other part of image quality is resolution, like how big is your image? How much information does it contain? Uh, and if someone's ever emailed you a logo for something you need and you put it in a Word file and it's very blocky and there's almost no detail, then you'll know what I'm talking about because it's not just a good idea, it's the law. You have to have adequate resolution for what you're doing. And we're talking about resolution, what we're talking about in an image is just how many pixels per inch are in that image. The more pixels you have, the more detail you have. Also, the more file size you have, but that's just part of the deal. So to just demonstrate it, it can be hard to wrap your head around. I know it's kind of a common concept, but like figuring out what it really means, you have to kind of compare apples to apples. So here's an image. This is if this image were on a sheet of paper at 2 by 2 inches at 300 pixels per inch, you would have a really great quality at that size. You'd have a really great 2 by 2 inch picture. If you took that same 2 by 2 picture, but it was only 72 DPI, it's going to look worse. It's probably not going to look quite this bad because we're seeing it in bigger than 2 by 2 inches on the screen, but it's going to look less good. Um, and if we went down to something like 36, it would basically be not good for anything. So knowing how much resolution you have is really important. 300 pixels per inch or dots per inch, sometimes the way it's expressed, is kind of the standard for print. You want your images to be 300 dots per inch at the size you're going to use them. And that's where it gets confusing. Because if you look at this image, if the image here is 2 by 2 inches at 300 dots per inch, it'll look great. But if you take that same file and enlarge it, uh, it'll get blockier because you're not increasing the amount of information, you're just making it cover a bigger area. So um, you need to think about what resolution you need for the application you're going to use it for. If you're going to have a 24 by 36 print made of your artwork, you need all the resolution you can get. You definitely want to shoot it with a professional camera at its highest resolution setting to get every little bit of information you can. And then, software can help a little bit too, and printing technology is really great. But just to go back to that other frame, keeping that in mind that, if someone sends you a file and says, well, it's 300 DPI, it might be, but if it's only 1 inch by 1 inch at 300 DPI, you're not going to be able to blow it up to 8 by 8 and have it look good. So, more resolution is always better when you can get it. And then just kind of lastly, to wrap it up, software really quick. I just very briefly touched on a few bits of software. Um, Again, you want to spend your time being an artist and not having to be a computer tech. So your desire to learn software or spend a lot of time in it is really up to you in terms of what you need to get done to make good images. But Adobe Photoshop has, for 30 years been the industry standard for image editing, for doing retouching, um, also color correction. Um, Adobe Lightroom is a companion product, and it's focused more on being a digital darkroom. It's really great for adjusting color, sharpness, isolating areas to work on skin tones, all those kinds of things. It's a dedicated tool for photo editing, and doing all over color corrections more than copying and pasting and classical photoshopping yourself into another picture. Lightroom is really great for that. But they're Adobe products that are full-fledged, so they're kind of expensive. I think Lightroom might be available as a standalone product still, but most of it's subscription based now, so it can start to become expensive if it's not something you use all the time. On the mobile side, Apple Photos, which I showed you really briefly, I think does a great job. It's pretty full-featured in terms of doing everything except retouching, gunk out of your photos and those kinds of things. If you just need to adjust, uh, color temperature and contrast and all those things, it can do all of that pretty easily. And another one that's great is Photoshop Express, which I think is free. It's an Adobe version of Photoshop on your phone. I think it's free with in-app purchases for some more advanced features. And this kind of does everything Apple Photos does, but it also will do some retouching. So you can retouch out dirt and you can do more advanced stuff. And it's pretty good too. I don't use that as much, but it is pretty good one. They also make a mobile version of Lightroom, which I do use quite a bit because it's a little more full featured than Apple Photos, but any of them are great. So we're right at 7:30. I think I've probably talked long enough, but hopefully you have questions or I've given you some stuff to think about. But I thank you for your time, and Penny thanks you for your time. She's very tired, so fire away with any questions you have.
So a couple questions in the chat, and now that you're not screen sharing, you can probably see them. So Dwight was asking, is there a file format that protects your art from download, or how does one best protect an image online?
Uh, the best way to protect an image from being swiped online is not to put it online. And that's kind of the sad truth. There's just no way to prevent someone from grabbing your images. There are ways to limit people from getting high quality images. But that's not really a photo format. That's more of web coding that prevents easy downloads. But when you can screen capture your screen, anyone can grab at least a screen resolution version of your artwork. So it's definitely a problem. Photoshop and other software, you can put digital watermarks inside your images that aren't readily visible to the naked eye, but are readable. But those are those only limit the amount of protection you might have. So it's really difficult to keep someone from nabbing images of your work. Putting visible watermarks across your art is one thing you can do, but even that AI has become pretty capable at deleting those. So you'll see a lot of like e-commerce sites that offer artwork for sale, and they'll show a small preview image at full size, or not full size, but the full image. And then when you click on it, you'll get a zoom. So you can zoom around to see more parts of it, but you can't download the big version all at once. So there are ways for websites to sort of limit how easy it is to grab full images, but there's really there's no bulletproof way.
Eric, have you ever used Canva for photo editing?
I have not. Um, and I don't really have any opinion on it because I haven't used it. And it's just because I've always used, other tools. And I know that Canva's become really popular and broad-based for a lot of things because it's so easily available. And I'm sure without knowing much about it, I'm sure that it does a lot of the same image editing tips and tricks that I showed, like certainly like stuff from the iPhone app and those things, being able to adjust exposure, contrast, brightness, color, temperature, saturate, all those things. I'm sure that it will do that, but without having really used it, I can't say. But I think it's free, right? So if it's free, it's worth looking at.
Yeah.
I'm the one that asked that question, and I do use it a lot. I haven't
Hmm.
used it extensively for editing my photos because I haven't been extensively editing my photos. Right now,
Hmm.
I'm taking most of my pictures with my iPhone, which is the iPhone 12 SE. It's pretty
Hmm.
ancient compared to
Hmm.
even what you're complaining about being a 14 and not whatever's newest,
Right.
17 or 18. And I can stand next to people with better phones and see that they're getting better
Yeah.
images on their
Yeah.
screen. Um, that being said, I feel like Canva has been pretty powerful for me. I do pay for the pro version, so I may be
Okay.
getting tools from that. But I use it to make newsletters and social media and share, like tweak photos that I need to submit to places. And I don't use it for resizing, but resizing is another thing that I've had to do a lot of with photos from my phone to then submit into shows because they have really specific dimensions.
Right.
So I wanted to put a plug out for Canva, especially
Hmm.
because I want to buy a camera. And then I might then can you do, I guess my question is, can I take pictures on a camera, put them on my computer
Hmm.
and edit them without paying for Adobe Lightroom or Adobe Photoshop?
Yeah, I know there's some other Photoshop alternatives that are like open source and I think free. Um, but I'm not sure what they are. I've always been in an ecosystem where like I do freelance work, and so for my photo work and design work, I use the Adobe stuff across the board. I use Adobe Premiere for video editing, and I use all of their stuff because it makes sense because I'm using them all. But if you just need photo editing software, I know that there's a few free or nearly free options, and if Canva has enough photo editing capability, because I think it's kind of an all-in-one. It does design, layout.
It
Yeah,
does do a lot of design and layout, which is what I like about it because I don't need that much of the photos. And it has some auto
right.
setting. You can just say, here's
Sure.
a photo, it looks bad, and click the button and the magic wand makes it better. And you're like,
Right.
hey, I'm done.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of that stuff's only going to get better. Like when I was, that first thing I was demonstrating that, just making your square images be square. I like, there's got to be websites that do this automatically. And I did a quick look, and I found some that sort of did it, but they were kind of limiting, and so I didn't bring any of those up to recommend, but a lot of that stuff is out there where you can, if you're willing to look and find something that works for you. Sometimes they have a free version that limits the file size you can output, or they watermark it or that kind of stuff, which doesn't help you obviously. But I know that there are some free or nearly free. I want to say there was a line of software applications called GIMP that did Photoshop style editing and that same kind of metaphor. And I don't know if that's still the one to look at, but um, you know,
Okay,
that might be something to look at.
put it on my list.
Okay. Other questions?
Um,
Oh yeah.
Dwight had a good comment about photos that the best results he's gotten is from taking his photographing his paintings outdoors.
Right.
Uh, and I do you have any thoughts on outdoor lighting and how to make
Yeah.
use of that?
Yeah, looking at his comment, open shade is that's kind of the key. Direct sun or light on anything is just as with people, it usually doesn't give you the best results. Like if, you'll be brightly lit if you're facing right into the sun, but your eyes are going to be closed. And the same is kind of true for objects where it's going to be harsher and more contrasty. A cloudy day, a nice, medium bright cloudy day or open shade on the shady side of your house is great because it takes away all of that harsh light. And then even if it's a little dark, you can usually open up the exposure after the fact or compensate it for it in your settings on your phone or camera. So that is a good way to do it. Back when in the pre-digital days, we would often photograph artwork using a copy stand, which is kind of a limited vertically oriented kind of tripod device, but there's a flat board on the ground that you place the artwork on, and the copy stand can go up and down, and it just points straight down. And then if you position the copy stand so you're getting indirect light from windows or another source, that kind of does the same thing. Instead of getting, a spotlight on it where you're going to have all this really harsh light that falls off quickly, you get nice even light. So that's kind of the key is even light that's not overwhelming the color. So yeah, especially if you have like, large size canvases or anything, outdoors would be great.
And then Dwight's got another awesome question about removing reflections. And I think,
Mhm.
yeah, for folks that might be working in materials that might throw out some reflections, do you have any tips for flattening those or?
Yeah. His comment about using a drape, like if you have reflections that are coming from behind or wherever your light sources are, limiting where those light sources might throw a reflection at the lens is helpful. Um, those little pop-up boxes I was sort of describing, basically what they are is these sort of fabric cubes that like pop into place, and they make them in various sizes. They're like essentially a multi-dimensional light box that you then put your object in, or if it's flat, you put it toward the back, and it kind of does the opposite thing that shade does. It gives you light from all sides at once evenly. So if you're doing like small ceramic works or those kinds of things, small sculptural works, those could be great because you get really nice even lighting. Obviously, for bigger things, it doesn't work as well. If you're doing large scale sculpture, then shadows and sunlight and all those things are they're going to kind of mess with you in any circumstances. But again, just like with people, it's even lighting is a little better. And if you're doing sculptural stuff, like getting some modeling light to show a little bit of contrast can be helpful, but sunlight is usually not the best. So, but like for reflections, like say if you had flat artwork in with glass, I've shot some gallery stuff where they already had the show up, um, and they had stuff behind glass. And what we did was, because some of them were very large, what we did was they gave me a 16-foot step ladder and put me at the top of it, and then they would move the artwork in on the floor assembly line fashion, and I would shoot each piece again, trying to get it as square on as I could from the step ladder, and then after the fact, I would do the aspect ratio and all those things, tweaking those to get them, make sure that they were square again. But doing that and shooting down from a long ways off helps minimize glass reflections for art that's behind glass. What else? I don't know if we want to talk, if Audrey had more questions about like videography equipment or if there's specific camera stuff or anything like that.
Well, my question about that is, I just applied for a grant and received it to pay for a specific camera. So I just want you to say that camera is amazing, which is the Fujifilm XM5. And all I know
Oh
is,
no, you didn't get that one, did you?
no, just say that one's amazing. That's all I need you to say.
Yeah, yeah, I don't, I sort of as with Canva, I haven't used any of the Fuji cameras, but I know that they're super highly regarded. Like I know Sony cameras were a big deal for a few years, and I think Fuji has sort of really become super popular. And like I said, anything you buy now will be amazing because the technology is so good across the board. And if it works for you, and if you're buying a camera body, you're as much buying a lens system as you are a camera, because down the line, like if you want to do more things photographically, you want access to lots of good lenses, and there's so many good lenses out there now that I don't think you can go wrong.
This one is supposed to be good at video and
Hmm.
photography, and that's just and it fit the budget. So
Right.
that I felt like,
Good.
trainer, let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like any camera you buy now will be, like something from the future compared to a camera available 5 years ago, because it is from the future. Like it'll be just so much better. Like, the discussion about iPhone 12 versus iPhone 15 or whatever, they just get so much better so quickly that you probably won't outgrow it anytime soon, and it'll do everything you need it to do.
Great.
Eric, you mentioned archival purposes, print purposes. Are there any other contexts where people might need to supply like TIFF files or
Hmm.
like really high resolution files? What other contexts might people run into the need for high
Yeah.
resolution photos?
Print is kind of the number one because, again, because TIFF files, you don't lose image information even if you compress them, which means that even the compressed files are going to be bigger. But that's not so much an issue as it used to be back in the old days when you were doing stuff on floppy disks or whatever. And it also does the CMYK color space, which is how four color printing works natively. So those would be the chief reasons you'd use TIFF files. But some places might want them even just for a digital archive for those same reasons that they don't lose image quality. They're kind of a master image. So those would be some other good reasons to have TIFF available. But when you're shooting, no camera shoots in TIFF format. It's probably either going to be like a JPEG, or I know that Apple one has sort of the HD format. That's their new one. Or maybe RAW um, on the phone, but definitely RAW on a dedicated camera. And RAW, again, is to me, it's by far the best option because you're getting all of the information that the sensor originally sees, and it gives you the most flexibility and dynamic range. So, the classic thing is that you take a photo of, your subject, but the sky is blown out. It's so bright. With a raw image, it gives you the best chance of bringing detail back into that, or bringing, you know, additional detail out of dark areas. That's what raw really does well. So it gives you an immense amount of flexibility, but it does usually mean that you have some work to do after you shoot the image. Whereas if you're shooting with your phone or in JPEG mode on your camera, they'll give you really nice looking images right away, but with less ability to do fine editing after the fact. So it's kind of a trade-off.
Um, Janet asked, what's the best way to capture an image from video? Like if you
Yeah.
have a video.
Yeah, video, that's a kind of a broad question because it really depends on what you're shooting the video with. Like on a phone, um, the video can be really good, but sometimes the compression schemes mean that any individual frame might be a little less sharp. So it's kind of hard to say. Like if your video is really steady, and you want to get a still out of that, you'll probably have good results. But if it's something you're moving around a little bit more, it's hard to say. It really depends on the phone and the camera in the phone. With dedicated cameras like the one Audrey is getting ready to buy, um, again, if you're shooting carefully, those will give you really nice like a 4K image, which is what most cameras are shooting now in video. It'll give you really nice quality at, be like 3,800 pixels on the long side, which is pretty good size. That's usually a little bit smaller than a still image from that camera, but really good. But to actually get that, you usually have to um, I mean, you can do it from your phone. You can scroll to the frame you want and screenshot it or that kind of thing and get an image that you can send. But you're really going to want to probably download that video into some desktop software to get the best quality screen grab out of that software. And that could be like iMovie could probably do that on the Apple machines, or certainly like Premiere or any like video editing software. You can output screenshots natively from the original resolution. So I don't know if I have a really definitive answer there, but there's a number of ways you can do it.
So you have to have a particular video software to do that.
That's the best way to get it. Like, if you're doing it from your phone, like I said, you might get good results by, just grabbing one frame out of it. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But it's
Okay,
better,
thank you.
like the temptation is to shoot video and like, well, I'll get still frames and then I'll have photos but it's really better to shoot dedicated stills if you really need them to be the best quality they can be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Eric, do you have much experience in the world of prints and the advantages of different styles of prints? Dwight has a question about a particular
Hmm.
type of print, and I'm curious. Uh,
Yeah. Uh, I have not done anything like that where the print itself is simulating depth or impasto. Um, so I don't know what that process entails. Um, I would guess it's probably something where you have to work closely with the printer, the vendor, and they would provide you specs. And I don't know if you've done that, Dwight, or okay. Yeah, I would if you have a vendor that can do it, you might see if they have a spec sheet or tutorial videos that describe the process, because there may be some digital way they're extrapolating, depth detail out of contrast like if maybe they take shots of it from two different angles and do like a stereoscopic thing. I don't really know. But that's a really intriguing question. I'd be curious to know the answer.
great. Are there any other questions that come to mind? Cool. Well, I didn't talk to Eric about this beforehand, but as Montana taxpayers, you pay for Eric's salary, and now you know Eric. So feel free to
Yeah.
email Eric with if you start to get into the weeds in the technical aspects of photographing artwork. Um, I think as an enthusiast, I bet Eric would be excited to talk to you about photography and photography techniques. Sorry, Eric, but
No, I'm happy to geek out about it all day.
I have a
Or,
quick question about storage, but I might have stepped out if you already covered it. Did you discuss ways that you can store
hmm,
photos? Is it Google Photos the best deal, or a hard
yeah.
drive, or both?
Yeah, like for my own stuff, I don't really use cloud-based stuff that much. I mean, I will do finished images online so that they live somewhere, but I tend to just store things on kind of a succeedingly larger series of hard drives. Um, I have typically my best practice is to get, reliable hard drives, get two of the same size, label them Eric Heidle 6A, Eric Heidle 6B, put the same stuff on them, and then keep one at a different location. Uh, I haven't I haven't kept up with that as well as I'd like in recent times. So if I ever have a fire or a flood, I'm in trouble. But if you have all your raw stuff on those kind of setups, and then you output your final JPEGs or TIFFs or whatever, and then upload those images to the cloud, so it's just the critical key ones, your finished artwork. Um, that's a good way to kind of have an extra bit of security that they will survive, and also just to make them more shareable so that they're easy to get when, you know, you have a gallery asking for them or a client or whatever. I mean, I move photos around through things like Dropbox or that sort of thing. And, the state has a file transfer service. And sometimes when we're sending things to our state print and mail division to get brochures made and that kind of thing. That's sometimes how we send stuff. So there's a bunch of different options. There's WeTransfer, which can do pretty big size transfers, and it's a freebie. So there's a bunch out there that do that sort of thing. But as for just like archiving your images and stuff, there are some good online ones. There's one called Backblaze that a company I used to work for we used, and it basically mirrors your file servers, drives, and I think you just, you pay for how much storage you want, and they just continuously back everything up so that, if something happens on your end, it's there. And we did
Can
have
you
to
rec
do some recoveries.
can you recommend some reliable hard drives?
Yeah, I'm trying to see. I use a lot of like Seagate brand drives, um, which are good for, basic storage. They seem to be reliable. I think maybe I've had one of them go bad. And it was an old one from work that I don't know how old it was or what had happened to it in its lifespan, but I had it for a while, and then one day it just quietly stopped working. Um, Western Digital makes good ones. I've built a few solid state hard drives of my own, which basically is just a chip that looks like a computer memory chip and then an enclosure. I'll show you what one looks like real quick. Yeah, so this is, it's about the size of a deck of cards, and it's just this enclosure, and the enclosures can be like $80 or something because there's some chips and stuff in there that make them faster. These are USB-C, and then there's just a little memory card that you pop in there. So you can build those to kind of different specs pretty easily. And those are ones that I bought mostly to do video editing on because they're very fast. Like with the newest versions of USB-C and a setup like that, those solid state drives, there's no spinning platter like older hard drives. They're really zippy, so you can edit video or really big images quickly. And then when you're done with that, you can push them off to the slower, pokey drives. I got a really big, I don't even know what brand it is. It might be a Western Digital. It's like a 12 terabyte drive, so it's gigantic, but it's also, you know, big ships are hard to turn around quickly, and that's definitely the case with that one. Like you can hear it spin up to speed, and it's like kind of all the lights dim in the room kind of things. So there's a variety of solutions out there, but you can go to Target or Walmart and find decent sized ones, or go to the online stores, look for like a 4 terabyte drive. Those are pretty cheap.
Oh, Janet, were you trying to? Oh, I thought maybe Janet, you were starting to ask a question, but I must have been imagining it.
Yeah, I think so. I was
Thanks,
just
Carol.
stirring what he just said. That's good.
Good.
Cool. Um, well, yeah. So if questions come up, I encourage you to reach out to Eric. maybe if you have specific questions about specific cameras, specific contexts, and capturing images and videos in those contexts, I think that would be a good reason to reach out to Eric. Talking about files and protecting files, maybe remember I have a Dropbox link to share with Eric's photos from the Livingston session, with the headshots that Eric took, and then some of our group photos from that day. So I will send those along as well. Um, yeah, it is almost 8, and so yeah, I encourage you to reach out with any questions you might have. I The session was recorded. I think this will be a really good one to have to be able to revisit later. I'll get it posted into the learning platform, and so that folks can refer to it later. And yeah, I guess that's kind of it. Eric, did you have any parting thoughts before we adjourn?
Just to reiterate that, yeah, do reach out. If there's anything you guys would like to see in a follow-up session, a more detailed image editing thing, or I don't know what, or if you just have questions, feel free to email me or call me, and I'll be happy to help if I can. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me here virtually.
And it's eric.heidle@mt.gov, right?
Yep.
Cool.
And
Awesome.
yeah, and our contacts all on our website too.
Yeah.
So we're findable.
Great. Well, have a good night, everyone. And
Thank
sure I'll
you
be
so much.
talking to folks soon.
Thank
All
you.
right.
That was super helpful.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.